Hello and welcome to another Retro Island Diskettes, the podcast where we abandoned a guest on Retro Island. And today we've got a guest with a long and prestigious history in games development from the 8-bit systems of the 80s through to the present day.
Indeed we do. He's seasoned and wise in the lost programming arts, having worked on all the great systems and some of the not so great, like the Atari Jaguar. And it's highly likely that you've played one of his many, many creations.
Please join us in giving a warm island welcome to a Guinness World Record holder, a coding machine, and a hero to gamers for over 3 decades. It's none other than Jim Bagley. Welcome, Jim.
Hello, thank you.
Jim, it's time to jump into your first musical choice. What have you chosen to start us off, and why have you chosen it?
Basically, it's the Spectrum 128K version of Midnight Resistance. It's probably one of the 2 games I'm most famous for, which is that and Cabal. And Keith Tinman did a bloody good version of the tune.
Jim, you spent your early years in the village of Moreton in the Wirral Peninsula. What are your memories of growing up there in the late 70s? Set the scene for us, if you will.
I was still at school, obviously, and I looked forward to the weekends, in the summer holidays, when we'd have a fairground come to the shore, and now and again they'd have some arcade games. And rides and stuff, and so it's we were close to New Brighton, which was at the time a holiday resort kind of thing. So it was good. It was good fun.
Yeah, I lived in a small town and we always looked forward to the travelling carnival game because they bought the arcades with them. They were always a bit shonky, a bit wobbly, a bit worse for wear, but I had a lot of fun in them. Yeah,
it was better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It was better than nothing. So you were, apart from that carnival, was there an arcade that you could go to regularly, or did you have to wait for that to come to town?
Yes, in New Brighton, which is a couple of towns down. Mm-hmm. There was a huge street, a row of arcades that went all the way down from one end of the street to the other, down to the shore. So it was.
Can you remember any particular games that were making an impression on you at this point?
I used to play a bit of Defender, but I was never any good at it back then.
Yeah,
it was evil, that game.
Arcade Defender's terrible. The controls.
Do you not like it?
Not compared to home.
It's a hard game. It's a hard game.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with you there, because it seems to be better for some reason on a keyboard than it is with the controllers in the arcade.
There's one button in the arcade for turning direction, you see.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
I think I've only ever played it on the home ports. I don't think I've had the chance to play it on the arcade, so that'll be why.
So all the classic arcade games there, and just to get an idea of your coding roots, did you have access to computers and any coding encouragement at school?
At school, we had there was one BBC and 6 Sharp MZ80Ks and one Research Machine 380Z, and no one used that. It was just a black box that was left on its own. As you can imagine, everyone wanted to play the games on the Beeb, so there was always a queue to play, because there was some brilliant arcade ports for the BBC back then. And so because there were 6 Sharp MZ80Ks there, I would have a play with them since no one was using them, and ended up teaching myself to program, because I thought if I can teach myself to program, I'd be able to make games and I won't have to pay 10p a go in the arcades. So
Yeah. And how did you go about actually teaching yourself? Was there anyone at school? Because my experience of being at school and having these new 8-bit computers come into the school, there was never actually a teacher who knew how it worked.
Yeah.
The computer teacher was a maths teacher. They said, maths, you can teach computers. So I ended up teaching myself faster than he could teach himself to be able to teach the kids. So
yeah,
I ended up like way ahead of him.
Yeah, and presumably this was basic to start off with.
Started off with basic, yeah. And then by this time, my mum got me a ZX81 at home because she saw how much enthusiasm I had for programming. Because I used to bring the manual back home and I'd write things down, out of the manual on paper and change things and make other programs. And then when my mum got me the ZX81, that was it. I was away, writing loads of games in BASIC.
And the ZX81, you were in BASIC as soon as you turned on the Sharp. So you had to load BASIC up first, didn't you? It wasn't
with the Sharp you did, but with the ZX81 you were straight into BASIC. So
yeah.
Did you have the old memory pack, the RAM pack?
Of course, yes. Not a lot you could do with 1K.
And a bit of blue tack to keep it from crashing.
Yeah. No, not a lot you could do with the 1K.
Saying that, though, there's been some amazing games recently done in 1K by Bob. And he's got high-res games in 1K as well.
Yeah,
so
but
there's a lot that can be done with the ZX81 that we never thought possible back then.
Well, a name which I'm sure will come up later is Mike Singleton. I think he bought out a lot of 1K ZX81 packs, didn't he? He was hired by Sinclair to bash out those 1K games. And he did a good job.
He did.
Yeah. So that's what was going on at school, and you had your ZX81 at home.
Yep.
When this ZX81 arrived, can you remember what was the first thing that you did with it? Did you dive into coding, or did you load up some cassette?
Loaded up the cassettes, basically just to see what was on what games were on the tapes. And then when I realised they're not that good, some of them, because it was the Cascade 50, I then started making my own.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward to hearing more about what you created. But first of all, would you like to introduce us to your next track, please, Jim?
It's the specky version of Ping Pong and the title tune that was done by Joffa Smith, the awesome Joffa Smith, even. With only being a basic programmer with the ZX81 as well, it was soon I came up to the line of I need to do it faster because basic just isn't fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so when I went to the Spectrum, because at least with the ZX81, to change a character on the screen, it was only writing 1 byte to a screen location, whereas with the Specky, it's a bitmap screen, so it's a lot slower in basic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you were learning to code and coding at home, was that a solitary effort, or did you start to have a group of friends who are also into it?
It was basically a solitary effort because the friend that I grew up with that ended up doing Roadrunner with, he was an artist. So I was sort of like the only programmer for most of the time. So it was a case of suck it and see and just keep trying, keep plucking at it.
Yeah, yeah. And while you were still a hobbyist before fame and fortune came knocking at your door, Jim, what was the first thing, perhaps when you'd started to incorporate machine code into your programs, what was the first thing that you programmed where you thought, okay, I'm quite proud of this?
I think that one I was probably the most proud of was a friend had come round to my house and to have a play on the games and stuff. And while I was there, it said, no, should we make a game? And I said, what about Star Wars? So I thought, okay, fair enough. And then I started off, I got a crosshair on the screen, and then got some baddies on, and they moved around randomly, and then you had to like catch them up with your crosshair and shoot them.
Okay, and you knocked that up in one evening, did you?
Yes, yeah. Well, in like about an hour or so, and then and we started playing it.
There you go. And this was akin to the Atari Star Wars wireframe game, was it? Nice. Nice.
So, Jim, you're an accomplished coder with a huge back catalogue of successful titles, and we'll come on to your career next. But at this stage, did you have any kind of sense that, did you feel that I might be quite good at this? Did you ever feel that you found your calling?
When I was at school, I knew that all I wanted to do was make games. I wasn't interested in a job or anything. I didn't even know whether games were a job or not, because half the time it was played by mail, or you had to get. This was sort of before the shops was selling.
Yeah, there was no industry, so to speak, was there?
Yeah. They were more like in the back of magazines, weren't they? So yeah, it was a case of I felt that I knew it was something that I wanted to do because I was okay at doing it. It was something I enjoyed doing. I just didn't know there was a job that was going to last so long, and B, I just didn't think there'd be one local.
Yeah. Did you have an inkling about what you might do if you weren't a coder? Did your careers advisor at school tell you what you should be?
I don't even remember talking to my careers advisor, actually. It's that long ago. But yeah, I don't think... Well, the computer teacher used to say, you'll never get anywhere playing games.
We proved her wrong.
I showed him.
Yeah. So how did you come about your first real coding job, Jim? Did you publish something? Did you apply for something? How did that come about?
Basically, when it was time to leave school, there was a local shop in Liscard, like 2 towns, probably 3 towns down. So I'd go there and look at all the games, the different games that are coming out and stuff. And when it came to leaving school, I was like, I need to look for a job. And then, so I went in there, not knowing like that the Northwest and Liverpool was a huge like base place for making games and computer companies. I asked the guy and said, are there any local companies, expecting it to be no? And he said, yeah, there's quite a few. And I was like, oh, good. Any chance any of them, do you know any of them? Have you got any phone numbers? Do any of them come in? And he said, yeah, come in quite often to bring the games. So I said, can you get me a phone number? And he got me a phone number, and the rest is history. I phoned him up and got the job straight away.
Excellent. What year was this? Can you remember?
I think it was late 86 going on 87.
86, okay.
Yeah, the game came out in 87, I think.
So, Jim, would you like to introduce your next tune and why you chose it?
The next tune, right, yeah. The next tune is Commodore 64 Wizball high score tune, because it's awesome. It's just really mellow and it's really relaxing. I really like it. One of the finest tunes on the 64.
I agree with you, Jim. I think that was one of my favourite C64 tunes. It's a really catchy tune. There was a cover of it on Retro Gamer magazine recently. They had a CD with a modern cover of it, and my guilty pleasure is to listen to it in my car driving to
More
work.
so than Monty on the Run?
Monty on the Run,
a bit of Rob Hubbard.
You feel a bit hyped up after
It
Monty
loses
on the
track
Run.
halfway through. It kind of
Yeah.
it's lost the plot.
Yeah, Wizball, the high score theme's a bit more chilled out. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the dog wanting to.
What's the dog called?
The other dog.
I hope the dog's called Sir Clive or something.
No, one's Daisy, and the other one is Sprocket.
Daisy and Sprocket. There you go. I've got a cat called Gizmo.
So, Jim, you've secured your first job in the industry at Consult Computer Systems. Is it like any other job where you're given the tasks nobody else wants to do at first, or were you thrown in head first into a major project?
I was basically thrown in head first. It was, this is the job you're doing, and do it. And it was a game by Mike Singleton. So I was like, oh my God, I'm doing a game by Mike Singleton. This is my first job in the games industry. And it's like, this legend has made so many amazing games already, and I'm doing one of his designs.
Yeah. What was the name of that game that you were working on, first of all?
Throne of Fire.
Throne of Fire with Mike Singleton. Yep. And Mike Singleton, I believe, before he worked in the industry, was a teacher.
Yeah, he was a teacher, apparently, yeah.
Did that make him a good mentor to pick up tips from?
I never actually spent much time. He used to work either from home or another office or something. He'd only come in now and again to see, to work with Glenn with doing Dark Scepter. Mm-hmm. So basically never really chatted too much. It was just, he'd look at the game now and again. Oh, it's going okay, and carry on. And like one of the funny things when he was doing Dark Scepter, he came bursting into the office, and I've done it, and then he played the sample, and it was like like a clinking of swords for Dark Scepter. He said, I've got it down to 200 bytes, and he'd basically gone into the garden and recorded himself clanging two spoons together, and then compressed the data down to 200 bytes. So he was really made up with that.
Cutting edge stuff at the time.
200 byte sample.
Well, let's think about when you first went into the company. I'm always fascinated to know what the desk is like of a game creator. Were you working in the office or were you working from home?
I was working in an office.
Working in an office. So just describe your desk to us. What systems, software, and paraphernalia did you have around when you were coding these cutting edge games?
It was just like a normal, not a school desk, like a normal desk that you see in IKEA or wherever. Usual four legs, and there's none of the fancy stuff where you have the holes for the power cables or anything that they have in them now. But and I had one monitor and a Spectrum, and I had micro drives to begin with.
Right.
And, and a tape recorder.
You were coding directly on the Spectrum, were you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Using the Zeus assembler, and and micro drives and tape.
Did you have an aftermarket keyboard or anything to make it a bit nicer to type on?
Rubber keyboard.
Oh, wow. I've got one behind me. I'm going to grab it.
Some dead flesh.
So, right, thousands of lines of code on a dead flesh keyboard.
Yeah. I was used to it. It was fine.
Wow.
And I'm guessing the assembler didn't have any of the shortcut macros when you're hitting the keys.
No, none of that.
So back on the subject, a little bit of community. I always got the impression that there's quite a community of coders in Liverpool. Was it one of the development hubs in the 80s, and did you feel you were part of that scene?
Well, we never really went to the other offices or anything, but there was a lot. There was trying to remember now. Like we had Ocean, which was in Manchester, but the guys originated from in Liverpool. There was Software Creations, Bug Bite, I think. Mm-hmm. not software creation, software project. Sorry, Matthew Smith. And there was Consult Computer Systems, and there's quite a few others. I say, but we never really mingled.
Oh, okay.
I think the bosses didn't want us to be poached, maybe.
Okay, yeah. And you had other companies, a lot of companies up north. So was it in Sheffield? You had Gremlin Graphics.
Yeah.
It surprises us when we do the podcast when we get these 80s programmers on. We get a lot of northern accents.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's usually raining up here.
Yeah, of course.
So you ended up staying indoors.
Yeah. So because you've got such an exhaustive a library of games that you've worked on, let's just rattle through some of the ones that you were working on then after this game. Tell us some of the titles that you worked on in sort of 86, 87 or 88.
Right. I started with Throne of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then went to Canvas and did Street Sports Basketball.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't sound good. Roadrunner, and sure I did another one there. No, I think that was it there. And then went on to special effects, and that's when it started doing all the ocean stuff. Started with Guts, and like Batman Cape Crusader, Red Heat, Cabal, Midnight Resistance, and all them. Obviously, they're not in order. I can't remember the order exactly.
Yeah, can you remember of any unreleased titles at this time that never quite made it out to market?
Yeah, I think I was supposed to do Midnight Resistance on the Amstrad GX 4000, but it died before we basically I got a dev kit, and funnily enough,
You've got the controller.
Got the controller, yeah.
GX 4000 dev kit. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing died before it hit the shelves.
Yeah, so that never came out. And what else have I done that never saw the light of day? Oh yeah, when the original Game Boy came out, a bit after it came out actually, because we were never really the first to get things. It was when I was doing Hudson Hawk, right? They gave me a dev kit, and to get used to the dev kit, I thought the best thing to do is see if I can get something on screen and moving around, and some sound going. So I wrote Space Invaders clone, and got it done in about an hour, and then well, it was Z80, wasn't it? So I'm pretty used to.
Yeah, you think in Z80,
so,
I imagine by this point. Yeah.
And so that was pretty easy, and then I took it to the boss and said, I've been getting used to the machine. I've done Space Invaders. Do you think it'd be worth us getting the rights to do Space Invaders and release it? So, no, don't be silly. Space Invaders is an old game. And then I think it was about between 3 and 6 months later, it came out, and it was number one in the charts for like months and months.
Yeah.
So I was a bit gutted. So I swore to myself, any games that I did like by myself, I would keep to myself and not put through the company, because they wouldn't want it, and B, it would then come out by someone else and bloody popular. Yeah,
I'm guessing Hudson Hawk, the Game Boy game, was as popular as the Hudson Hawk movie.
Yeah,
got the Amiga version over there somewhere.
I never even saw it when it came out. If it came out over here or anything, we weren't given copies of the Game Boy version. It was only, I think it was a Bite Back, the first retro event I went to in 2009. This is how late it was. That was when I first got a copy of Hudson Hawk, because I've got a copy of every game I've done now, obviously. but that was the only one that I hadn't had up until this point. Well, I think it was maybe 2. And I saw that at Bite Back, so I thought, right, I'm getting that. Don't care how much it is. I'm just going to get it. So probably shouldn't have said that, because the person who sold it to me was probably thinking, shit, I could have cleaned up on this one.
We were conducting another podcast this morning where we spoke to Kevin Toms of Kevin Toms Football Manager fame, the man whose face appeared in every magazine. And at one point, his game was ported to over 16 different machines. It was crazy.
It was everywhere, wasn't it? Yeah.
Did you ever find yourself coding for something and just thinking, why am I doing this? Nobody's going to buy this, like making something for the Dragon 32 or the Auric Atmos or something like that?
When I did, I can't even remember the name of the game now. It was Mystery Mansion or something like that. It was a point and click game, but it was like a girl's book, adventure book type thing.
Right.
And it was like a license. So at the time I was thinking, why am I doing this? But it's
young adult fiction.
Yeah.
Point and click. Nice.
But I guess from the sound of it, though, are you? Was it just a sort of day of work for you? You come into work, boss says you're working on this title, and you settle down and do your job.
Basically, like when we were at Special Effects, it was we used to call it the whatever Ocean didn't want. We get all like the Hudson Hawk, which was a flop, and Cabal and Midnight Resistance were like, oh my god, the amount of graphics in this, how the hell are we going to get it on a specky? But so we were thinking, no, it's definitely got to be what Ocean didn't want with the games that we got. They did say it was just what was free, or who was free at the time. So when no one was free, they'd pass it on to us. It could be that, or whether it was, I think it was the other way around. I think it was the shite jobs, basically. But thankfully, we managed to do good jobs of the games that we did at Special Effects.
Yeah. Well, the next track that you've chosen will take us into arcade conversions, and we can talk a little bit more about the likes of Midnight Resistance and Cabal.
Yep.
Can you introduce your next track for us, please, Jim?
My next track is the Amiga version of Bobble. It's just an awesome tune. I love it.
Bubble Bubble there was a massively popular and widely ported title, and that song will now be in our heads for the rest of the
Forever.
day. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So we're moving into the late 80s and the early 90s, and there was a massive popularity of arcade conversions and licensed titles during this time. You're credited on some huge ones, some of which you've mentioned already, but tell us about some of the conversions that you've worked on, Jim.
Right, there's the first arcade conversion I did was Roadrunner. That was sort of early on in my career, and so I still wasn't as good as I was later on when I got to like the likes of Cabal and Midnight Resistance, and I ended up messing up. I was trying to be clever with trying to do some 3D collisions for the Seed and Roadrunner, and ended up like getting just mental, and it was just it wouldn't always register. So I was a bit miffed at that. So I might have to fix that and do a next version of Roadrunner and just release it.
Yeah. So you were aware of that at the time, but were you just forced by release schedules to just put it out there?
The thing is, back then it was all releases had their slots. It was like needs to be out by this time, and as soon as it's ready, it was shipped. Whether as soon as the time came, it was if it's not ready, ship it. If it's as long as it's not a bad crash, then or anything like that, then you shipped it. So I didn't get a chance to fix the collision.
Blame the player.
Well, the thing is, that's one of the things that my ethos and one of the programmers that I'm working with when we do Bags in Space and Warhawk on the next, when we make games, we make sure that A, it's playable, and B, when the person dies, it's because of a mistake that they've done, not because of the game.
Yeah. So there's a sense of fairness.
Yes.
And not ever feeling hard done by. Yeah, that's a good philosophy to work by, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that was Roadrunner, and then what about some other conversions that came after that?
Then Cabal and Midnight Resistance, because like we were given them we were supposed to do them for Ocean. And Ocean at the time were known for doing good games and conversions. So I thought, I've got to pick up and like get up to speed, get a really good game out, and put my whole effort into doing Cabal and Midnight Resistance. And thankfully, I think I did a good job. The annoying thing is, back in the day, once the games were finished, we were straight on to the next. We were given another project and straight on to the next one, and we never got any feedback from the players or anything. And so it was only until like later years, when email and doing events, that I've had thousands of people say how good Midnight Resistance and Cabal was. So it's like I've had to wait so many years to actually find out that other people actually liked the stuff that I was doing back in the day. So.
Finally reaping what you sowed. And when you say you converted a title, so let's take Midnight Resistance, for example.
Yep.
There are obviously musicians and graphic artists involved, but when it comes down to the pure programming of that game, was it just you, Jim?
Yes, it was just
me.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, basically we had one programmer, one artist, and one musician, and that was it.
I guess if you think about it, it's probably a really efficient way of coding a program of that size, in that if you had a whole group of people, you'd have probably spent half your time fighting.
Yeah.
Whereas you just have Jim's vision. So when you play Midnight Resistance, you're literally... It's the brainchild of Jim. Yeah. So given the disparity, though, between the hardware, between the arcade machines and the home computers, did you have to spend a lot of time creating interesting ways to overcome those limitations?
Yeah, basically, well, for a start, when we first got the project, they brought a silver briefcase, which had the PCB, the arcade PCB in, so we could hook that up to a telly. And it was on free play, so we could play it as much as we liked, to get to know the game, get to play it through from start to finish. And I was usually the only one that could play through most of the games all the way through, being a hardened gamer as well. So it was we'd use me to play the game, and we'd have the artist watching it, or sometimes video recording it, or taking photos, and then or sketching out the map layouts and the way the baddies came in and attacked, and when they attacked. So we'd have like a lot of reference work to work with when we were like doing the games.
But that reference work was as a result of you taking photos, tracing sprites on the arcade screen through the super gun setup, I guess, that you had. So a company like Tato wouldn't actually send you,
no, we never had any source
just
or anything.
a board.
Yeah, it was just a board, and it had a SCART cable that you could plug into a TV.
Yeah. Did you ever use that as an excuse to add a little bit of your own artistic license to the arcade, or did you try and stay as true to the original as possible?
I tried to stay as true to the original because I wanted to put, especially with Midnight Resistance, because it was such a massive game and there was a shed load of graphics. I wanted to get it as close to the arcade one as possible, with as much in as possible. So which one of the things I was quite proud of, because like the Commodore 64 version didn't have some of the things, like I don't think it had the Jeep at the beginning, and it definitely didn't have the cutscenes. So I made sure that I put all that in on the Specky version.
Would you like to introduce your next tune and why you chose it?
My next tune is the Commodore 64 Ocean Loader 4. A lot of the times, one of the reasons you would load a game on the Commodore 64 because the Ocean Loader tune was pretty good, and it was one of the things that the Commodore guys used to rave about, the fact that they could listen to music while the game was loading rather than listen to the Specky noise.
Well, it strikes me that you seem to keep your head down and are very focused on the programming. And I'm not sure how influenced you are by the industry goings-ons. But if you think about the early 90s, today we often hear about like the likes of Electronic Arts and other industry giants annoying gamers.
Yeah.
But it's no new thing. Big fish buying out smaller fish, becoming the monsters that they are.
Yep.
So when you were in the thick of it, say in the early 90s, did you feel the industry changing with companies like EA, Microprose, Ocean snapping up the competition?
At all the places that I've been to, I can quite happily say that when I've spoken to the bosses about this, I said, just don't get too big, because what happens when you get too big, they end up, like, if they have a failure with one of the games, it can sometimes wipe the companies out, which was a pattern that I was sadly seeing in a lot of the industry at the time, because they were getting too big, and then they'd have a failure or two, and it'd just wipe the company out, and you'd just have to get rid of everyone and start to have more startups.
Yeah, we saw an example of that with Sensible Software, didn't we? When we interviewed Stu Cambridge. Got to that last project, which got stuck in development hell for about 4 years. and just completely wiped them out. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. So I always said to them, just stay small and compact and carry on. But such is life. But the ones that didn't aren't around anymore. So I must have been right.
So we're in the early 90s now, Jim. The ZX Spectrum is becoming a distant memory.
I've never.
and it's all about the 16-bit micros and consoles.
Yeah.
So just update us on your career now, and who are you working for in the early 90s?
In the early 90s, I was Special Effects Stroke Rage software doing games for Ocean. Still on the Specky.
Still on the Specky, hanging in there.
Because it was 95, I think. Was it the last Specky game I did? No, 91, 92. I can't remember actually offhand.
Yeah,
I've got it written down somewhere. I should have put it up on the screen, shouldn't I?
As we're on the subject of the Spectrum,
but yeah.
Crash or your Sinclair?
I know most people say Crash, but I used to like your Sinclair. I don't know why. I just
We've got a copy of Crash here.
I used to get anyway. Yep.
I haven't got a copy of your Sinclair here. Everyone normally says Crash. So.
Everyone says Crash.
There you go. One point.
Your Sinclair and Sinclair user, or unclear abuser, as people used to call it.
So in the 90s then, as we move through the years, we saw the mighty Atari fall, but not before their last hurrah with the Jaguar. And of course, there was also the Sega Saturn, which saw the start of the downfall of Sega, at least in hardware manufacturer. But you got to work on some of these systems, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about. Let's start with the Jaguar. What did you get to do on the Jag?
I didn't get to do anything on the
Jag.
You
didn't get to do anything on the Jag.
No,
okay.
No. A friend of mine did, but I never. Sadly, well, I don't know if it was sadly because I was never overly keen on the controller. It just didn't feel right. It was a big, bulky block of. It didn't even look like a proper controller, did it?
Yeah.
But yeah, the Jaguar.
Yeah, but you did get to work on the Saturn then, on quite a prestigious title.
I actually enjoyed the Saturn because it was underrated. The only problem with the Saturn was the fact it had the bug in the hardware where if you tried to use anything with transparency, it would take 6 times longer than it should have done to render because of a bug in the hardware. And that's why the likes of Sega Rally has the black and white stipple for shading, because you can't do any alpha transparencies because it just slows the whole game down.
Yeah.
It takes so long to render.
So I understand that you were involved. Was it with the Doom port on the Saturn?
Yep.
Yeah. So tell us about that, because I understand there's quite a story behind that, and limitations and something about the game being crippled.
Basically, I did a version for approval, and it was running fine, full screen, and sent it away, and then about 3 days later, got a phone call from John Carmack saying, "I've looked at it, and I don't want you to do. I don't want you to use the 3D, the 3D hardware for the graphics. I want you to do it with the processor, with the CPU rather than the GPU." And I was like, "Are you sure? Because it's going to make it slower." And I said, "Yep. I don't want you to do it with the 3D hardware." And so I spent the next 19 years thinking, why the hell would the owner of the IP, unless you've got something against Sega, why would they kneecap their own title?
Yeah.
And obviously, with them asking for the port, I ended up doing it their way anyway, because they were the ones paying for it, so it wasn't my choice to make. So it was only until, I can't remember the year, maybe 2013, I think. But anyway, I think it was one of the first revival meets in Wolverhampton, and they had John Romero there, and I was doing a talk about Specky games as well at the time. So when I got there, went up to John and said, "Look, I know we're both going to be busy doing talks today, but can I grab you for lunch and we go and have a chat? Because I've got a boner one month's big." And said, "Yeah, sure." And so we had an amazing talk. We were only supposed to have like about half an hour break for lunch before we had more things to do, and we ended up like chatting for about an hour and a half. And but yeah, it was amazing bloke, lovely bloke, and he ended up saying he was the one who was supposed to be doing the approvals, and if he'd have seen it running full screen, full frame rate, he'd have said, "Get it finished, and when it's finished, port it back to the PC." No.
So just when you actually had it running with the hardware acceleration, the 3D hardware, did it actually look better, or was it just speedier?
It was speedier, I think. I hate to say he might have been right, but it was just the way the fine textures work on the Saturn, the way, because it didn't have the ability to shrink it in the distance, with the depth, and it just didn't look right, I suppose. So it did look better, more doomy than, but it was a lot faster and smoother.
A good performance hit, yeah. Was the version that used the GPU ever released? No, it's not out on the internet somewhere.
No, sadly long gone. I don't even have the sources anymore, unfortunately.
Jim, would you like to introduce your next tune, please?
The next tune is the awesome tune for Robocop on the Game Boy, title tune, which was also used in the Ariston advert. Played it so many times back in the day. I even added burns on the dev kit ROMs for the Game Boy that we had, just so I could listen to it on the train going to work and back.
Nice. Wow. Well, that might help to answer our next question, which is that it obviously took a lot of time, dedication, and commitment to produce the games you did. But what does Jim Bagley do to relax when he's not coding, apart from listening to Robocop on the train?
To relax, I play games and make games. It's just something I do. I really enjoy it. If I couldn't do games, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, and that feeling's obviously followed you throughout your career.
Yeah.
You've never got to a point where you've thought, I'm getting a bit sick of games now.
No, well, it's like I've said this to a few people as well. It's like, why don't you go in, when you say, why don't you go into business programming? Because you get a lot more money doing business programs. It's like, yeah, you do, but like say an accountant's program, that it'd probably get me a lot more, but it's not a game. It's like, the way I see it is, when you're making a program, you basically playing with numbers, because it's moving stuff from memory from one place to another and doing some maths with it. And when you're doing like an accounting program, it's like all the numbers are dead, because it's an accounting program. It's all legal and legally binding and serious and everything. So you can't have things jumping about and blowing things up, and it's just numbers on the screen. It would bore the hell out of me.
So it doesn't have that creative aspect to it.
There's one example that might slightly fly in the face of that makes me laugh is in Microsoft Excel 97. There was an Easter egg. You used to be able to type in this series and it would take you into a 3D flight simulator.
That's right.
So there was obviously a coder at Microsoft that was desperate to be a games programmer at that point. And he coded this flight sim into Excel.
Yeah.
So actually on that note, Jim, do you have any Easter eggs you've ever coded into anything? Because it's kind of getting up to that Easter egg time. Yeah.
I think I did one. I probably shouldn't say, because it was probably naughty of me to do it at the time.
You should totally say.
You should totally say. No one's going to come and get you now.
Well, the thing is, the source has been released. Put source out, didn't I, for Cabal? So when I did Cabal, I was so pleased with the results, and I was joking with the other guys in work about how many more sprites we had on screen than Operation Wolf. So when the game loaded, if you pressed a certain selection of keys and held them down while it was at the end of the loading, then it would go to another screen, and basically the fella off Cabal would walk onto the screen, and then there'd be the word Operation Wolf at the bottom of the screen, and then pixels would appear out of him like he was pissing on Operation Wolf.
That's brilliant. And were you worried that if your source code's being released, that there was any comments or anything in there that would come back to haunt you?
Yeah, because like back in the day, we used to, like, because no one would see, no one saw the code when it goes out, when the game goes out, and you keep the code or whatever. There was no worry about what people, no one would see it anyway, so it didn't matter what you called the labels. Yeah,
you got to be careful with source control these days.
Yeah. One of the good things about then is, because we were making the port and it was just the one coder and everything, we could do things like that, like the pissing on Operation Wolf, and like put different things in games that kept the scene alive and the screen alive, something, so that there was something moving. You could add like little variants to the game if you wanted to, or so it was good times. Like, it's a bit more clinical now, isn't it?
Yeah,
I should imagine everything's done by committee now and overseen and checked and double checked.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to something a bit more wholesome than pissing on the competition. I understand that you are a Guinness World Record holder, Jim.
Yes.
And you have the certificate to prove it. What do you hold a world record in?
I hold a world record in having ported the largest arcade game ported to the ZX81. Before my game, the largest game that was on the ZX81 that I know of, I think, was about 48k. And when I did Dragons Lair, it was about 15 meg.
And this was a full port of the FMV version of Dragons Lair.
It was my own port of the FMV. Got the FMV in strips, and then just put the sections together, and then did my own, because I've never completed it. I suppose I should have done, really. So I didn't know when you had to press the certain keys for what direction, but following the video you can sort of see, like, it'll flash right or left or up or down or whatever. So half the time I'd sort of know. So I wrote an editor that would play. I could play through the scene and then stop on a certain frame and then say, right, press this key here, and then go on. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the player would then play up to that point, and then if you don't press the key within so many frames of that point, then you either died or if you did press the key, it would carry on.
Yeah, and this is an example of what you like to do to relax in your spare time. Because I'm sure it wasn't commissioned. Do you have any other ideas like this that you want to do?
Yeah, well, I noticed you've got one of the awesome Pac-Man cabs from Numbskulls behind you.
Yes, back there.
Yes, well, behind your head. I could only see bits, but I knew it was the Pac-Man cab. Yeah, basically it all started from Pac-Man, believe it or not. It was in 2012 I wrote, I was talking to John Studley, who's the UK champion at Pac-Man, and he also a couple of years ago got managed to get a freehand highest score on Pac-Man. Well, there is, you can't get higher. There's about 7 people who've got this score. And I was saying to him, so back in the day I could only get to like level 4 or 5 on Pac-Man before getting killed. And I said, have you got any tips? So he gave me a few tips, and he also gave me a few pointers to look for on Google and YouTube. And when I Googled it, I accidentally came across the memory map for the Pac-Man hardware, and obviously it's written in Z80. So I thought, it's Z80, I know Z80 inside out. So I will now finally, because all the way through my career, I was making games because of arcade games, and I've been lucky enough to be able to port arcade games to the Specky and the Amstrad, and so to be able to make one was like my ultimate goal. And so I thought, I found the memory map for Pac-Man. I've got to make a game for Pac-Man hardware. And so I thought, well, rather than porting an arcade game to the Specky, I thought I'll port a Specky game to the arcade. And because it's such a limited set of hardware, because you've only got like 256 characters and 64 16 by 16 sprites in total. And you can only have, depending on which version of the hardware, you can only have either 6 or 8 sprites on screen at once. Mm. So I thought, well, I could probably get away with doing Manic Miner. So I ended up writing Manic Miner from scratch on Pac-Man hardware. And that was my start of getting back into the retro scene and giving something back for free to the people who've bought my games over the years.
Yeah. So this was an unmodified Pac-Man board. You just changed the program in the ROMs.
Changed the ROMs and
away it went.
There you go. Yeah. And after doing that, I enjoyed going back to the roots, programming roots, because I was doing games in Unity and stuff, and C++, and so to go back to Z80 was great. I loved it. I really enjoyed doing Manic Miner. And then after that, I thought, what can I do next? So I ended up I started off on a ZX81. It was my first computer. So I thought, because I'd never done a game in machine code on a ZX81, it was always in BASIC. I thought, right, I need to write one in machine code. And so I thought, what can I do? And then I ended up doing a high-res driving game, a little track, and you like figure of eight, and you drive a car around it. So I did that and called it Jim Bagley ZX81 Racing, and I quite enjoyed that. And I was talking to a friend, Andy Spencer, who runs a Retro Computer Museum in Leicester, and I was talking to him on Skype at the time, funnily enough. And I said to him, I've finished this game now, I don't know what to do. He said, reckon I could do a movie? And he was like, no, don't be stupid. Well, he might have swore a little bit in between the words of don't be stupid. But yeah, I said, well, I've got an idea, so give us a couple of minutes. So he hung up, did a quick test, and a couple of minutes later, I got back in touch with him, said, I'd do video play, and you said it couldn't be done. And I got the ZX81 up and showed him and said, I put the camera to the screen and showed him the screen actually, and said, like this, and I had this random data from basically took a large file and streamed the data from the file onto the screen on the ZX81. I said, this is, in theory, a working video of a movie player for the ZX81. And I said, oh my God, no way, no freaking way. I said, what should I do now? So it just ended up doing Dragons Lair, because it's full motion video.
Yeah, I guess the natural thought is
the most famous
laser discs. Yeah,
laser games to do. So,
could you please introduce your next tune?
This is Monty on the Run for the Commodore 64.
It's not Retro Island Diskettes. We always say this. It's not Retro Island Diskettes without at least one Rob Hubbard song.
Sorry, that's Rob Hubbard.
Rob Hubbard.
The H is Northern.
Oh, is it? Is it? And he's got a symphony covering his music, hasn't he?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
It's very soon.
Yeah.
We'll have to go and attend that.
Yeah. So in preparing this podcast, Jim, it became very evident that you appear to have your fingers in 1,000 pies, and it continues to be evident as we talk to you, from electronics projects to retro remakes, VR, and even a new Vectrex game, or was it Bomb Jack that you ported on the Vectrex?
Yep.
First of all, how do you find the time? And then we'll come on to Bomb Jack, because I'm interested in that on the Vectrex.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, how do you find the time? Is it just the fact that you enjoy it so much?
It's a hobby, it's a job, it's a life, basically.
Yeah.
It is what I do. Yeah, I just really enjoy making games. I enjoy programming. I enjoy the challenge of like the old 8-bit machines. Trying to get the most out of them, and
I guess the unsung hero, though, in this story, or heroes, would probably be your family, who are allowing you the time to do this.
To do this time and time again. Yeah, they put up with so much.
So on the specific case of Bomb Jack on the Vectrex, then tell us about the challenges that the Vectrex throws up. How's that different to other machines that you've worked on?
It's different in the fact that you've basically got to guide the electron beam around the screen rather than just drawing bytes on in memory. So you've got to like use the time that it's taken from. You basically give the ray a direction to go, and then you tell it to do that, and then you've got like a couple of instructions that you can put in there for moving things around to give you extra processing time, because otherwise if you're just moving the gun around to drawing the things, it's going to take even longer before you then process the game and then go back to drawing the screen again. So you have to sort of intermingle your code with the drawing. So yeah, that's a good challenge, because you need to do it fast, so you can. Because otherwise, if you draw the whole screen, and then you wait doing a load of processing, by that the bits that you've drawn on screen will start fading, and then you have to draw them again, so you get the flicker a lot more noticeable.
I always thought when I saw Vectrex games playing that each game probably has to have an optimized algorithm on how you're going to handle the characters on the screen and in what order. Did you find you try it one way and it wasn't quite right and you'd have to tweak it? Yeah, quite a few times, because of the way, because you have to like reset it back to the center point to so you can then go to draw the next sprite or whatever, and then because you don't want like, because it's not like pixels, you can be off by like half a pixel or quarter of a pixel or whatever. So when you move to another point to draw another sprite again, you could be off by half a pixel and not really know it. So you then end up having sprites that wobble around when they're supposed to be still. So that's why you have to reset the gun and to go back to the center point.
Very analog experience.
Yeah,
it sounds a bit like an Etch-a-Sketch.
There'd be all sorts of like you'd be waiting for like there's capacitors and things firing this thing around. So if you're trying to hit it too hard, it's going to really go out.
Yeah, yeah. But you managed to finish up Bomb Jack, and
no, it's not finished.
Oh,
basically,
it's not finished.
No. I've got stuff on the screen and got the guy, the main character, moving around, but I ended up stopping that because of the Spectrum Next. I ended up like going full in on that.
Yeah.
So Bomb Jack is on hold until the Spectrum Next is finished, and I can get back to that.
Yeah, yeah. So that does bring us up to the present day and the various projects that you're involved, including the Spectrum Next. There's lots to talk about on that. Your name came up in association with a new service as well called Antstream. Is that something that you're working on as well? Tell us about that, Jim.
Yeah, Antstream is it's like, how do I put it? It's been likened to Netflix, but for retro games. So you can play old arcade games or Specky games or like Amiga games, Commodore 64 games. So you can play all the old games that we've got. You know, all the games that we've got are licensed, so we have got permission to use them, because we wouldn't want to be doing things the wrong way. And basically, it plays the game on the server, and then streams the video to you, and then obviously you play with it and it sends it data, and then you get the next frame, and so it's all good magic.
So the idea is to take the complexity of setting up the emulators and things like that away from it, and you just have a thin client.
Basically, you have a client that basically just plays video streams and takes the data. So we can have it on anything. So you can play it on your phones, you can play it on Amazon Fire Sticks, you can...
Will there be a ZX81 client, do you know?
Sadly not, no.
You can do it. We know you can do it.
You wouldn't expect that. Or a Spectrum Next.
I don't have the time for that. It would be nice to get it on, but no, I don't think we'll be able to. got an interesting feature, a really interesting feature. It's one of the things that brought me to the company. One of the things that I really like about it, and it's the challenges, and that involves basically we reverse engineer some of the games and add in extra features so that it will start you like we have like in groups of 5 challenges for each game. Well, for the games that we've got challenges for, we will get more challenges as time goes, but there's only so many of us. So what it does is, like say, Streets of Rage or something. And I haven't got that on again. I'll pick a game that we've got. So, say you're playing.
It sounds a bit like Super Mario Maker. I don't know if you've tried that, but they sort of start off at different levels and different points in the game. Is that the vibe?
No, basically it's like say you're playing Bad Dudes, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the challenges that I did. You have to have the nunchucks and then kill as many defeat as many baddies as you can without losing the nunchucks. So if you get hit and you lose the nunchucks, it's challenge over. But what you can do is you start off on that level with the nunchucks, and then you play through as much as you can, and then whatever score you get, you challenge one of your friends, and they have to play the same challenge and defeat your score.
Nice. So you're reverse engineering sort of achievements into old games.
Yeah. So it's like playing like achievements for the old games. It adds a new twist to them, and it works really well.
That's
really
a nice touch, especially on those arcade games, which are often a very linear experience that are designed originally to gobble up coins to then add in these challenges.
These extra features. It's nice. A really good idea.
And we were talking earlier, Neil, about sometimes you're a bit time constrained as a grown-up. And, when I play, be it Ghouls and Ghosts or Chucky Egg, I'm a demon on the first level. And then I normally turn it off because I haven't got the time. But at least then you could challenge your friends to sort of, let's see how quick you can do a first level.
Speed run the first level or something like that. On the subject of the sharing of ROMs, obviously you're doing this legitimately. You're getting permission.
Tag team.
And presumably those original creators are being rewarded.
Yes.
But what's your personal view on the games that you've made in the past and people sharing your games? Does it annoy you?
Not at all.
No?
Basically, I never got paid a bonus for Midnight Resistance or Cabal or the likes of that back in the day. So I was just paid a wage for the 3 months that I worked on on either of them. So for me, it doesn't bother me whether people copied them or not, because the more people copied them, it just means more people played it, and more people play it. Then, I mean, the thing is, a lot of the times, back then it was. I mean, even now, especially with the Tories in, but people are in hard times, so not everyone is going to buy every single game. Because let's face it, for all the consoles that have been out over the years, if anyone's bought every single game, it costs them millions, and no one's got that many millions,
or that much time,
to get all the games and play them. So, it's not good to copy the games, but if you had no intention of buying the game because you couldn't afford to, it's expanding the viewers or the users, the people who play the game. So they might tell their friends, saw this game, it was brilliant, Midnight Resistance on the Specky, and then they might be able to afford it, so they might go out and buy it. So I see it as a positive thing.
Yeah, it's very black and white to consider a pirated game a lost sale. It's not necessarily a lost sale.
Not necessarily a lost sale.
Yeah.
And I think there's always a sort of cynical view now sometimes where you have these games which are pretty much abandonware and nobody's been interested in them sometimes for decades.
Yeah.
And then they
exactly.
hear, like, say something that Antstream's coming online, and all of a sudden it'll be, oh, we want a lot for that.
Yeah,
And
I want some commission for Vindaloo on the BBC Micro.
Exactly. And you're like, well, I guess you have to negotiate something reasonable with them. So it's like, you know, you have to really be realistic.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we would like to come on next to the ZX Spectrum next, because it's a very exciting project. But before we do, can you introduce us to your final tune, please?
The final tune is the arcade version of Moon Patrol.
My memory of Moon Patrol is I grew up in a small town in Dorset. There weren't many places to go. I would go to the video rental shop to play a couple of arcade games. But the place to hang out as kids was the police station.
Yeah.
Because the police station back then, they had a social club, they had a bar, they had a snooker room.
That's awesome.
And they had arcade machines.
Oh, nice.
So I would go and play Moon Patrol
letting the public
in the police station. And if it was a good day, they would be having a police lineup, so I could earn a fiver or whatever to stand in the lineup and then go and spend it on the arcade machines.
It wasn't like one of those such small villages. They'd just be like, instantly no. Neil's there like winking.
So, Jim, you are very much the darling of the retro scene at the moment, well loved by the community. How does it feel compared to those early years? Do you feel like a rock star on the retro scene now that you're getting the feedback for all those games you made?
It's so nice having the feedback. There's been so many people like that have sent like heartwarming stories. Like one of the ones that quite often mention is a guy saying, "Thank you for making Midnight Resistance and Cabal," because he used to play them games when he was younger. Because basically he had a rough life and his dad would like hit him and stuff. So it was his way of getting away from everything that was happening. So things like that, it's kind of heartwarming that like I was just doing a job at the time. For me, because we never had any feedback, and then to realise that my game was comforting someone in a hard situation, it's really heartwarming. So it's nice getting that kind of feedback, because it shouldn't happen in the first place. But it's nice knowing that I made a difference.
So now your career comes almost full circle back to the ZX Spectrum with the Spectrum Next project. And for those that don't know, what's the Spectrum Next and what's your involvement in it?
Right, the Spectrum Next is what started out as a Spectrum clone, but with a redesigned keyboard for the Spectrum. And it was the keyboard was designed by Rick Dickinson, the amazing designer who did the originals, and which is what we all fell in love with the Specky anyway. And he did such a good job on the case for the Spectrum Next. It's just why I decided to, after first hearing about it from Enrique, play Blackpool, I think. Play Manchester, I think. No, it was play Blackpool. And I, at the end of his talk, he said, "No, is there any questions?" And I put my hand up and said, "Where do I get a dev kit?" So I started playing with it, and for me, it was like I wanted it. I wanted it to be something that could be good again, like bring back the bedroom coders. Like the Raspberry Pi was supposed to be, and like with it being Linux based, it was a bit awkward for newcomers to programming to get to grips with it. I mean, when it first came out as well, the operating systems were a bit ropey and unfinished, so I think it came out too early, to be honest. But basically, when I got my Raspberry Pi, I was like, oh, it's Linux, and I ended up putting in a drummer.
You almost expected to turn it on and just have BASIC on the screen, like a BBC Micro.
There's too much friction, isn't there? Because you plug in a keyboard, plug in a mouse, faff around. You just want something to go. Plug it in and it's on.
Just plug it in the telly and away you go. Like the Specky was back in the day. You put power in, put it into the telly, and you sorted. You got everything you need. And so I thought that the Spectrum Next could be that, and then I thought, well, they've called it the Spectrum Next, and it's on a Kickstarter where you have to pay more than you would normally pay for it, because we needed the mold to get the case done and the keys and everything. So it's like, if you're going to call it the Next, then it should be something more than just a clone of a Spectrum. I mean, we had the Raspberry Pi as an enhancer, so I thought, well, if I make that like an enhancement and make it like as a standard, so that when people get it, they can use that and have a Spectrum with extra things like graphics, like sprites, hardware sprites, so that they can get things moving around the screen easier. Because I get asked this a lot when I'm talking to people about the Spectrum. Said, I tried to do a bit of programming back in the day, but I could never get anything on the screen and moving around, and I just give up. And it's because of the way the screen is laid out in memory on the Spectrum. It's split up into thirds, and when you see the way it loads the screen on the loading screen. So I thought, if I can add hardware sprites so that anyone can get a sprite on the screen and get it moving around, then you'd get that instant hit and instant feedback of, I've got something on the screen, rather than, it's a pain in the arse to do anything. And so, by doing that, I thought if I make it easier for newcomers to program, then it would bring them in and keep them interested, because they won't just pick it up for 5 minutes and say, I can't do it, and put it back in the drawer. They'll be able to actually get something on the screen, get something moving around, maybe make a game, and especially with me doing the tutorials, they'll be able to make their own games. And so hopefully we rekindle the bedroom coders.
It is certainly an evolution of the ZX Spectrum, but not such a quantum leap that it becomes a whole different monster.
We don't want to be competing with the likes of the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One or the PC. There'll be assemblers, there'll be sprite editors, there'll be graphics programs for it. So there'll be an awful lot of stuff to help you, as well as the tutorials that I'll be doing after. I'll have a little break once the Spectrum Next been shipped. I'll have a little break and then make a start on them. But if you ever wanted to make a game, I would say try it and give it a good shot, and you might really enjoy it, because most people that I know have been making games, especially for the Spectrum Next, they've really enjoyed it.
There we go. Persevere and you'll be rewarded.
Yep.
There we go.
Jim, you now have 2 important decisions to make before we leave you on Retro Island. You can pick only one of the 8 tracks you've shared with us today to keep you company. Which will it be?
I can pick one.
Only the one.
Only one. It's going to have to be Robocop.
Excellent Walking choice. Around Retro Island with the Robocop theme in your head.
Yeah. Well, going on and on and on.
I'm sure the other island inhabitants will be happy to share their choice with you.
Yes, well, Kevin will be there, who chose the sound effects of Space Invaders. I think he will have gone insane by now, just constantly hearing Space Invaders, and you'll just be striding out on the beach with Robocop.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And you can also pick one game or application to enjoy in Retro Island, the only condition being that it has no internet connectivity. What will you take with you, Jim?
Go on, what?
Oh, don't help him.
I'll make one little suggestion. I'd say, like, basic on the next.
Baggers in space.
Baggers in
Space.
Baggers in space
Excellent.
on the next. That is such a good and fun game to play, actually. So, and I'm not
Baggers
just
in
saying that.
Space. Your own game. I had the pleasure of trying Baggers in Space. I bumped into you briefly in Play Expo Blackpool, and you showed me on the prototype handheld ZX Spectrum Next.
Yeah.
And had to go on Baggers in Space. I remember it was good. I was a little bit starstruck at the time because I was meeting Jim, but it was a good game. I did enjoy it.
Yeah. Cool.
You've made your choices, Jim, and we hope they serve you well in your survival on Retro Island. Thank you so much for sharing your fascinating history with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jim. And if you enjoyed the show today, why not take a moment to check out our other podcast episodes? And for more retro goodness, my YouTube channel, RetroManCave.
And you can find me on the YouTube channel BackOfficeShow, to which you'll find links in the show notes, as well as links to Tim's choice.
Tim?
Tim's choices, because they're better than Jim's. No, let me do that again. And you can find me on the YouTube channel BackOfficeShow, to which you'll find links in the show notes, as well as links to Jim's choices. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.